Hello and welcome. You're watching the Global Reset on CNBC TV 18 Prime with me, Prashant Nair. This is the program where we analyze issues shaping our current world order. And of course, the big story earlier today, meeting between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The visuals are on your screen. The first face-to-face meeting side by side for the first time in 6 years. The two leaders were having it's the first meeting since 2019. Before the meeting began, US President had called Xi a tough negotiator and added that both countries always had a great relationship. The two leaders then briefly spoke in front of the press. I mean, that was a photo op, and the customary remarks between to each other, of course, with the help of interpreters. The Chinese president mentioned that it was normal for the two of the biggest economies to not always, and I quote, meet eye to eye. Let's listen in to some of these comments from the Chinese President Xi.
Since your re-election, we have spoken on the phone 3 times, exchanged several letters, and stayed in close contact. Under our joint guidance, China-U.S. relations have remained stable on the whole. Given our different national conditions, we do not always see eye to eye with each other. And it is normal for the two leading economies of the world to have frictions now and then. And in the face of winds, waves, and challenges, you and I, at the helm of China-U.S. relations, should stay the right course and ensure the steady sailing forward of the giant ship of China-U.S. relations.
Well, the giant ship of China-U.S. relations should not be rocked. That's coming in from the Chinese president. Well, the Chinese president also said that he was ready to continue working with Trump to build a solid foundation for the China-U.S. relationship. Let's listen in.
I always believe that China's development goes hand in hand with your vision to make America great again. Our two countries are fully able to help each other succeed and prosper together. Over the years, I have stated in public many times that China and the United States should be partners and friends. This is what history has taught us and what reality demands. A few days ago, in the latest round of consultation, our two economic and trade teams reached basic consensus on addressing our respective major concerns and made encouraging progress. This provided the necessary conditions for our meeting today. Mr. President, I am ready to continue working with you to build a solid foundation for China-U.S. relations and create a sound atmosphere for the development of both countries.
Chinese President Xi Jinping was also all praised for Trump's efforts to end the war in Gaza. He also mentioned that China was ready to jointly shoulder responsibilities with the U.S. to bring about peace around the world. Listen in.
Mr. President, you care a lot about world peace, and you are very enthusiastic about settling various regional hotspot issues. I appreciate your great contribution to the recent conclusion of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. During your visit to Malaysia, you witnessed the signing of the joint declaration on peace along the Cambodia-Thailand border, to which you had provided input. China has been helping in our own way Cambodia and Thailand properly settle their border disputes, and we have also been promoting peace talks to resolve other hotspot issues. The world today is confronted with many tough problems. China and U.S. can jointly shoulder our responsibility as major countries and work together to accomplish more great and concrete things for the good of our two countries and the whole world.
You know, that was, of course, the photo op, 4 reporters, 4 cameras. I mean, post this, the both leaders sort of headed off to have further talks, which lasted for about an hour and a half. After they sort of parted ways, went their own separate ways after the talks with that handshake, as you can see up on your screen, the U.S. president spoke with reporters aboard the Air Force One, and he basically talked about what both sides have agreed upon. This is, of course, President Trump with regards to his conversation earlier with his Chinese counterpart. Listen in.
I thought it was an amazing meeting. He's a great leader of a very powerful, very strong country, China. And what can I say? It was an outstanding group of decisions, I think, that was made. A lot of decisions were made, too. There wasn't too much left out there. And we've come to conclusion on many very important points, and we'll be handing that to you in a little while. We have it because there was a lot of different things, many of them very important. We're in agreement on so many elements, large amounts, tremendous amounts of the soybeans and other farm products are going to be purchased immediately, starting immediately. If you notice, President Xi authorized yesterday for China to start, did you know that, right? China to start buying in very large quantities of soybeans and other things, which I appreciated. That was a very nice gesture. And many other things like that. On fentanyl, we agreed that he was going to work very hard to stop the flow. It's a very complex subject because it's used for lots of different reasons, including anesthetics and things. But he's going to work very hard on it, precursors, and I think you're going to see some real action taken. I've agreed, as you know, I put a 20% tariff on China because of the fentanyl coming in, which is it's a big tariff. And based on his statements today, I reduced it by 10%, so it's 10% instead of 20%, effective immediately. I believe he's going to work very hard to stop the death that's coming in. But again, it's complex because of what fentanyl is, what the precursors do. So I think you're going to see a big difference. We've had discussions on many of the elements that you're talking about all the time. You're asking me questions, and most of those things were I think agreed to for the most part. Then we agreed to almost everything at a very acceptable form. I wouldn't say everything was discussed because of the things that probably, in retrospect, we could have discussed that we did for some reason it didn't come up.
Did he agree? Did you agree to sell any more downstream
chips? We did discuss chips, and they're going to be talking to NVIDIA and others about taking chips. If we make great chips, and NVIDIA is the leader, and I'll be speaking to Jensen from NVIDIA, but they're going to be discussing that with NVIDIA to see whether or not they can do. I said that's really between you and NVIDIA, but we're sort of the arbitrator or the referee. It's a little rough up here. The skies are a little rough.
What are the major stumbling blocks that are left now to work through, and how soon do you think you could sign a trade deal with China?
Well, I think pretty soon. We have not too many major stumbling blocks. We have a deal. Now, every year we'll renegotiate the deal, but I think the deal will go on for a long time, long beyond the year. We'll negotiate at the end of the year, but all of the rare earth has been settled, and that's for the world. I mean, worldwide. This, I guess you could really say this was a worldwide situation, not just the U.S. situation. So we continue to produce the rare earths and buy the rare earths and everything else, when you see from other countries. But China is that whole situation, that roadblock is gone now. There's no roadblock at all on rare earth. That will hopefully disappear from our vocabulary for a little while.
So is that a 1-year pause on the policy they announced?
It's 1 year. It's a 1-year agreement, and we'll extend it after a year, like we do. It's a 1-year deal that will, I think, be very routinely extended as time goes by.
Clear, they're not going to impose the rare earth controls that they proposed. President Trump or President Xi came to an understanding in that sense.
What will your new tariff rate on China's goods be once you sign?
Other than what there's the tariffs, they made exactly the same.
55%.
It's about, now it was 57, now it's 47.
Okay.
Because we reduced it by the fentanyl.
So, sir, it sounds like you might be going to China then after a successful
Yeah,
meeting.
that's another thing we agreed. I'll be going to China in April, and he'll be coming here sometime after that, whether it's at Florida, Palm Beach, or Washington, D.C.
Okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break here. You heard from both the Chinese president, of course, not in terms of his assessment of how the talks went, but you heard the President Trump's assessment on how the talks went in some detail. What we'll do next is get you a China expert to weigh in on what has been agreed upon. So, Parsley Ong is head of Asia Energy and Chemicals Research. She's also the senior EV battery research analyst at JPMorgan, someone who tracks China closely. She's been on this show before to talk about the anti-involution policies which are being implemented in China. So on the other side of the break, Parsley will decode what she at JP Morgan is making of what we've heard from both leaders so far. Stay tuned. Okay, as promised now, joining me is Parsley Ong. She's head of Asia Energy and Chemicals Research and senior EV battery research analyst at JP Morgan. Parsley, great to have you back on this program. Really appreciate your time here. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Good to be back again, Prashant. Lovely to see you again.
Parsley, let me start by asking you what you made of what President Trump has said after that meeting with President Xi of China. I mean, first meeting in 6 years between both the leaders. You know, and there are some agreements. We've only heard it from President Trump on the U.S. side. Maybe we will hear from the Chinese side as well. But at a headline level, what do you make of it?
Well, I mean, the meeting just concluded. The initial headlines coming up from both sides seem to be positive and broadly in line with what we were expecting going into the meeting. So there have been deals done on soybean side of things. I think the tariff reduction by 10% is positive, better than we had expected. And I guess overall, we are seeing more of a de-risking in the geopolitical side between the two nations. Yeah, I thought so. So I think overall quite a favorable outcome. I don't. The devil lies in the details, so we're still waiting to hear on the details between how exactly China will play a role in helping with some of the peace deals between Russia and Ukraine. But overall, I think there has been good progress on both fronts.
Mm. You know, from a financial market perspective, right, it's always about the incremental negative surprise, a positive surprise. So is there a positive impulse from where things already are at? I mean, there was a lot of expectation built in on this one. So incrementally, what we've seen and heard so far, maybe as I said, we will hear more. But from what we've seen so far, is this a positive impulse, or this is likely to be discounted very fast?
I would say it doesn't stop the longer term trend of both nations prioritizing their strategic and critical industries. Like the US still wants to build out its critical minerals and energy, new energy self sufficiency. So ESS is something that they still want to have localized US production capacity in. Whereas, as of 2024, huge majority of global ESS was supplied by China, but we are starting to see a shift in that take place with the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill. So I think it doesn't detract from the longer term strategic direction. But from a macro perspective, I think 9 months ago, people were worried that trade tensions and tariffs between the two nations might be negative for GDP. So I think from that perspective, maybe there is a little bit lower concern now. And even for the more recent export controls on critical minerals, rare earths, as well as some of the battery materials that China is very dominant in the global supply chain. The official statement that there is 1 year there is an extension, and China isn't explicitly going to ban all exports. I think even though the market was already expecting that, it's just good to hear official statements coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, Parsley, what you're saying, and I guess it's understandable that the strategic competition will continue, right, for both countries. Maybe what they've agreed on is the field on which this competition is going to take place. I mean, the no-go areas, while both try to outdo each other in pretty much everything that you said. Is that the way to look at this?
Yeah, I think it's just a de-escalation, but it doesn't change the longer term strategic goals of both countries.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. So from your sector point of view, for example, rare earth and critical minerals, etc., was a big pain point for countries around the world. While some of these export curbs were aimed at the US, but they hit other countries. They were, at least even in India, right? Some of these things were starting to hurt and people were getting worried. Do you think this now problem goes away? Specifically, I'm talking about critical minerals.
So critical minerals, or for my sector, like battery materials, things like precursors, which are basically one step downstream of nickel, cobalt, manganese, as well as lithium. China actually introduced export controls on the technology on 15th of July 2025. So for Chinese companies that are leaders in LFP production technology, if they wanted to set up an overseas plant or start exporting some of their higher end products, there was concern that they might not be able to do so. And also, I think in terms of just outright exports, for example, for anode and graphite, there were explicit export controls introduced on 9th of October 2025. But it's not the first time China has done this. They introduced export restrictions on graphite and anodes in 2023 and as early as 2026 as well. So what happened previously was that export control does not result in an outright export ban. We had maybe a 3-month drop in exports of, let's say, China natural flake graphite, as all these licenses were being processed and approved. But thereafter, the exports resumed as per normal. So as you mentioned, originally the market was a little concerned because if you look at the market today, China is responsible for over 90% of global anode and as well as LFP cathode supply. So technically, it would have been quite disruptive even to the Korea or US supply chains if there was an export ban. But I don't think the intention, but it would have hurt both sides, right? So I don't think the intention was ever to have an outright ban. And now the confirmation that there is a continued trade on that front is in line of expectations and generally positive. Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't China want, as part of de-escalation on this specific front, wouldn't China want, I mean, as you said yourself, US will keep trying to diversify away. But I mean, wouldn't China want guarantees that US does not do that? I mean, for example, back in July, there was that MP materials support from the US Department of Defense. Recently, there are reports that the US is now investing along with Australia for refineries there. So there is active attempts at diversifying.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, So I think China wants to focus on its own growth, and it is reducing. It is discouraging with the anti-involution measures that we talked about previously. There are certain areas where China is very dominant today and potentially supplying overseas markets at an uneconomic price. So potentially those areas, it's okay for them to let the supply chains decouple and reduce their presence there. Um, yeah, so I think, and in terms of hitting the 4.5% GDP growth target, a lot of the longer term strategy is focused more internally, as well as with some of its key partners overseas. Yeah.
The other area is semiconductors, right? I mean, what we've heard from President Trump is that on the NVIDIA issue and whether they'll be let back into the country and allowed to sell their chips, etc., Blackwell specifically, it's not, it didn't come up, is what I picked up from the headlines coming in. Again, it ties in with some of the, there's of course technologies involved, but there's also basic materials, right? Any thoughts here on this issue of chips and self-sufficiency in China, as opposed to, of course, I mean, an American firm like NVIDIA being let back in?
I think there are quite a few areas where we haven't seen the headlines yet, so those are usually the more sensitive ones. We don't have an explicit view on what kind of discussion will take place or outcome will take place, but chips, self-sufficiency, and protecting their technologies is something that both the U.S. and China are very clearly set on. So China will protect some of what it views to be its top technologies, and so will the U.S. Yeah.
Got that. Just one last question, Parsley, and maybe we'll need to have another conversation once we have the full scope of what's been agreed upon from both sides, not just the U.S. side. We discussed anti-involution policies in great detail last time. There's a great deal of bullishness, at least from a financial market perspective, on commodities, primary metals and even things like steel, etc. Is this connected to some of these policies, which I remember you told me will take, the impact will be felt many years down the line. It'll take time to show up. So just your thoughts.
Yeah, so it is actually showing up faster than expected in some industries. And then for some of, like for chemicals, which I also covered, that one is taking longer to show up. But definitely we are already starting to see it. Not all the shutdowns have even taken place yet. But yeah, it is something that we are actually seeing happen at an accelerated pace. So for chemicals, for example, yes, even if you look at the 14 5-year plan, right? Back when they made the decision to do to move towards China carbon neutrality, the actual detailed targets on ESS capacity or like refining capacity limit at 20 refining capacity ceiling at 20 million barrels per day. So all those numbers only came out 1 year after the conclusion of the meeting, but the execution of that policy happened almost immediately. So right now, I think after the Zhongquanhui that just concluded recently, there has been no official new targets out there, but we are starting to see industry meetings take place. Initially with independents and then probably moving up in terms of seniority. So I'll give you an example for chemicals. Yes, there has been no explicit ceiling on, for example, ethylene capacity at the moment, but we are starting to see some of the industry meetings take place. For instance, the MIIT actually called for an industry meeting amongst PT and polyester producers on the 29th of October. And PT and polyester in China is something with the presence of more independent players as opposed to SOE presence. So they're starting off there, and then they will come up with industry-wide policies. And then maybe later on, you will start to get more updates from the SOEs who typically have more senior leadership in there. But it is something that is happening, and which is very typical for China. Once the target is set, the entire supply chain moves to beat the target. So it isn't that surprising that we're seeing it happen so-called earlier than expected. But yeah, it is something that will happen and be implemented. Yeah.
Parsley, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us. Real pleasure speaking with you. And as we pass through, I mean, the initial headlines which are coming in after Presidents Trump and Xi met earlier today. Thank you very much once again.
My pleasure. Take care.
Well, that's it on this edition of the Global Reset. Thank you very much for watching. More coming up after a quick break.